Everyone thinks the 60-day law stops this. Read it. It doesn't. A president can order strikes before Congress even debates, and the missiles can move under a clause most people never open. That clause has a name and it changes everything. Donald Trump doesn't need a new war declaration to act. He points to Article 2, the commander-in-chief power, and says the authority is already there. Congress watches. The question isn't whether he can speak, it's whether he can strike. And then there's the War Powers Resolution. Passed to limit presidents after Vietnam, it promises oversight, deadlines, control. But buried inside is a structure that allows action first and debate later. 60 days. That clock matters more than you think. Here's the crack. The War Powers Resolution requires notification within 48 hours, but it doesn't require permission beforehand. That means force can begin before Congress votes. The letter arrives. The operation may already be underway. So when people ask what law allows military strikes on Iran, they expect a single statute. The reality is messier. Article 2 plus the War Powers Resolution create a narrow corridor and presidents walk it fast. But how narrow is that corridor, really? And honestly? A law written with built-in flexibility isn't an accident. It's a design. Congress wanted restraint without paralysis. That compromise is why presidents move first and explain later. Stop here if you think it's simple, because it's not. Trump frames potential strikes on Iran as defense, protecting U.S. interests, deterring threats. Under Article 2, immediate defense falls squarely within presidential power. But defense is a word that stretches. And that stretch is where the fight begins. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war. It gives the president command of the military. 2 clauses. 1. Tension. When Iran enters the equation, that tension isn't academic, it's operational. And someone has to move first. The War Powers Resolution tries to force consultation in every possible instance. But that phrase is elastic. What counts as possible? What counts as urgent? In a fast-moving Iran scenario, urgency wins and consultation follows. 60 days after troops are introduced, funding must stop unless Congress authorizes action. That's the pressure valve. But 60 days in a crisis feels like a lifetime, and a president can accomplish a lot before that clock runs out. Critics say using Article 2 for strikes on Iran stretches executive power. Supporters say it's exactly what commander-in-chief means. Same constitution. Opposite conclusions. And the battlefield becomes legal before it becomes physical. Trump doesn't need Congress to respond to what he defines as an imminent threat. That word imminent carries weight. It compresses time. It justifies speed. And once it's invoked, hesitation starts to look like weakness. But here's what unsettles lawmakers: once strikes begin, political gravity shifts. Members of Congress hesitate to undercut a president mid-operation. The War Powers Resolution exists on paper. Reality moves faster. The funding lever is Congress's ultimate weapon. Cut off money, end the operation. But cutting funds while forces are engaged is politically explosive. So the theoretical check becomes a practical dilemma. Trump's authority over military strikes on Iran isn't built on a single dramatic sentence. It's layered: Article 2 authority, war powers timelines, political calculation. Remove one layer, the others remain. That's the architecture. And here's the controversial part: this ambiguity might be intentional. A rigid system can freeze. A flexible one can act. Whether that flexibility protects the nation or concentrates power depends on who sits in the Oval Office. The War Powers Resolution has been tested before, challenged in courts, debated in hearings. Yet presidents continue to cite Article 2. The pattern repeats. Congress objects. Action proceeds. The cycle feels almost scripted. When talk turns to Iran, the stakes spike. Regional tension, global reaction, domestic politics all compress into that decision point. One order. One legal theory. And the world recalibrates around it. So what law allows military strikes on Iran? Not a single headline statute. It's the interaction between Article 2 and the War Powers Resolution. Authority in motion, bounded by time, but rarely stopped at the start. And here's the tension that won't disappear. Congress holds the power to declare war, yet presidents command the force. In that space between declaration and deployment, decisions happen fast. And once they do, reversing them is harder than anyone admits. Meanwhile, on the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue, members of Congress read the notification and realized the 48-hour clock is already running. Consultation feels symbolic now. The decision space is shrinking, and nobody wants to blink first. And here's the thing nobody's saying out loud: once military strikes on Iran begin, reversing them isn't procedural, it's political. Cutting off authority midstream looks like weakness. So hesitation hardens into silence. Trump cites Article 2 again, framing action as necessary defense. Supporters rally behind Commander-in-Chief authority. Critics whisper about overreach. Same Constitution. Different interpretations. And the divide is widening by the hour. The War Powers Resolution promises that 60 days is the outer limit. But 60 days is long enough to reshape a region. By the time Congress debates authorization, facts on the ground may already dictate the outcome. The War Powers Resolution promises that 60 days is the outer limit. But 60 days is long enough to reshape a region. By the time Congress debates authorization, facts on the ground may already dictate the outcome. And honestly? Nobody wants to admit this, but the War Powers Resolution only restrains a president if Congress is willing to confront one. Without confrontation, it's procedure. With confrontation, it's crisis. Zoom out. This isn't just about Iran. It's about whether the constitutional balance between declaring war and commanding it still functions under pressure. And pressure is exactly what this moment delivers. The 48-hour report arrives. The 60-day clock ticks. But enforcement requires votes, unity, momentum. And right now, momentum belongs to the executive branch. Congress feels reactive, and that perception matters. Critics push for immediate authorization or withdrawal. Supporters argue that Article 2 already covers defensive strikes. Both sides claim constitutional fidelity. The fight isn't over text, it's over interpretation. And here's what should unsettle you more than the strike itself: once forces are engaged, political cost protects the decision. No one wants to own the retreat. So escalation becomes the path of least resistance. Meanwhile, inside Congress, proposals circulate to assert authority: resolutions, funding conditions, symbolic votes. But symbolic doesn't stop momentum. And momentum is exactly what Article 2 was built to harness. The War Powers Resolution says forces must withdraw after 60 days without authorization. But withdrawal requires coordination, timing, and political will. If those falter, the deadline becomes a negotiation, not a command. Trump's defenders argue that waiting for Congress could jeopardize national security. Critics counter that bypassing Congress jeopardizes constitutional order. Security versus structure. Urgency versus oversight. And neither side is backing down. Here's what's uncomfortable about this: the Constitution doesn't spell out a clean script for modern military strikes on Iran. It sketches roles. The details are left to practice, and practice has favored presidents. And then something unexpected happens: public debate sharpens around the War Powers Resolution itself. Lawmakers who once ignored it now quote it. The statute becomes a battlefield. But quoting a law isn't the same as enforcing it. The original promise of the War Powers Resolution was shared responsibility. But shared responsibility requires shared risk. And when risk rises, institutions instinctively protect themselves first. That instinct changes outcomes. 60 days feels distant at first. Then it doesn't. As the clock advances, pressure builds for authorization, limitation, or exit. Each option carries consequence. Each vote draws a line. And lines are hard to erase. Meanwhile, Trump continues to lean on Article 2, reinforcing that Commander-in-Chief authority is immediate and decisive. The more he repeats it, the more it frames the narrative. And narrative shapes power. This is the part that should bother you: if Congress fails to assert its authority now, precedent hardens. Future presidents inherit that silence as permission. And silence, once institutionalized, is difficult to reverse. So the spiral tightens. Article 2 drives action. The War Powers Resolution sets a clock. Congress weighs confrontation against consequence. And as each day passes, authority doesn't just operate, it accumulates. The question is who stops it. Slow it down. The notification reaches Congress. The 60-day clock starts. No dramatic vote. No immediate challenge. Just paperwork sliding across desks while military authority expands in real time. The troops are already moving. The letter hasn't even been fully read yet. Here's what I keep coming back to: the War Powers Resolution only restrains action if Congress chooses confrontation. If Congress hesitates, Article 2 doesn't pause. It accelerates. On the other side of this, the White House keeps invoking Commander-in-Chief authority. Calm. Repeated. Deliberate. The message is simple: defense requires speed. And speed doesn't wait for consensus. Be honest. If you believed an imminent threat was real, would you wait for a divided Congress to authorize response? That tension, security versus structure, is tearing at the constitutional fabric right now. Nobody wants to admit this, but the War Powers Resolution was written with ambiguity baked in. It tries to control force without crippling it. That compromise is exploding under the weight of Iran. The 60-day limit approaches in theory, but reality doesn't feel theoretical anymore. Lawmakers float funding restrictions. Others warn against undercutting forces mid-operation. Every option feels like a risk. Zoom out. This was never just about a single strike on Iran. It's about whether Congress still decides when America is at war, or whether that decision now begins in the Oval Office. And honestly, the thing people won't say is this: the system is working exactly as designed: fast executive action, slow legislative response. The discomfort isn't dysfunction. It's the design under stress. This was never just about military strikes on Iran. It was about who truly controls the power to take a nation to war.